Chicago in the late 1800s was a city brimming with opportunity. Railroads stretched across the land, factories churned with life, and immigrants flooded in with dreams of fortune. But amid the noise of progress, one man would seize this chance not to build, but to destroy. His name was Herman Webster Mudgett, though the world would remember him as H. Holmes, America's first true serial killer. Born in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, Holmes grew up in a respectable household. His father was a strict disciplinarian, and his mother was deeply religious. Neighbors described him as intelligent but cold, a boy who seemed to lack the warmth of empathy. One story from Holmes' childhood lingers in folklore. He was terrified of the skeleton in his town's doctor's office. Bullied by older children, he was dragged inside and forced to confront the bones. Instead of cowering, something inside young Herman shifted. The fear transformed into fascination. The sight of bones, the mystery of anatomy, it awakened something dark. As he matured, Holmes cultivated an outward charm. He was handsome, articulate, and ambitious. But beneath the surface lay a calculating manipulator who saw people not as individuals but as opportunities. Whether for money, power, or something far darker, Holmes would use anyone to his advantage. By his 20s, he was already dabbling in fraud and deceit. Fake insurance claims, phony medical practices, and swindled businesses, all while maintaining the image of a respectable gentleman. But his darkest creation was yet to come. The stage was set. The city of Chicago, preparing for the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, would draw millions from across the world. Tourists, workers, and dreamers, all looking for cheap lodging and a place to stay. Holmes saw not a fair, but a feeding ground. And he would build his castle. Holmes arrived in Chicago in 1886, assuming the name that would make him infamous, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. The new identity gave him the veneer of respectability. He quickly found work as a pharmacist and, with his persuasive charm, soon convinced the owner of a local drugstore to sell him the business. Within months, the original owner mysteriously vanished. His wife later claimed Holmes had cheated them out of their store. Others whispered of darker possibilities, that Holmes had made sure his competition would never return. Holmes wasn't just running a pharmacy. He was studying people, their trust, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. Every transaction wasn't just about medicine. It was a rehearsal for manipulation. Across the street from the pharmacy, Holmes saw an opportunity, a vacant lot. He would construct a massive building that served multiple purposes, shops on the ground floor, apartments above, and eventually, a hotel. But this was no ordinary hotel. Holmes designed it himself, hiring and firing contractors constantly, ensuring that no one knew the full layout. This building would later be called the Murder Castle. It was a labyrinth of confusion, windowless rooms, doors that opened to brick walls, staircases that led nowhere, and hidden passages only Holmes could navigate. There were chutes leading directly to the basement, soundproof rooms, and even a gas line system that allowed Holmes to suffocate victims without ever entering the room. To outsiders, it was just an ambitious businessman's hotel. But inside, Holmes had created a factory of death, and soon he would put it to use. What made Holmes truly terrifying was not only his castle but his charisma. He was magnetic. Women found him charming. Men respected his confidence. He dressed impeccably, spoke with eloquence, and seemed like the picture of success. But behind the smile, Holmes was a predator. He specifically targeted young women who had come to Chicago seeking work or adventure. Many of them were alone, vulnerable, and unfamiliar with the dangers of the big city. Holmes would lure them with promises of employment at his hotel or pharmacy. Some he courted romantically, convincing them of his affection. Once inside his castle, many were never seen again. Some reports suggest he required female employees to take out life insurance policies in which he was the beneficiary. It was a perfect scheme: lure them in, trap them, kill them, and profit from their deaths. The police in Chicago, overwhelmed by the rapid growth of the city and the chaos surrounding the World's Fair, barely noticed the disappearances. Young women often came and went. If one vanished, it was assumed she had simply moved on. Holmes relied on that assumption, and he thrived. In 1893, Chicago hosted the World's Columbian Exposition, a celebration of progress, invention, and culture. Millions flocked to the city, filling the streets with life and energy. It was a time of wonder, but also of vulnerability. Tourists needed lodging. Workers sought jobs. Young women arrived in droves, hoping for opportunities in the booming city. Holmes saw his chance. He began marketing his hotel as a place for fair visitors to stay. But for many, it was a one-way trip. Guests checked in, but some never checked out. The fair provided Holmes with a near-infinite supply of victims. The anonymity of the city worked in his favor. With thousands of people arriving daily, a missing person hardly raised suspicion. The murder castle became a silent predator, swallowing lives while the world outside celebrated progress and innovation. But not everyone was fooled. Slowly, whispers began to spread. Why did so many young women connected to Holmes vanish? Why did his building feel so strange, with its endless corridors and locked doors? The mask was beginning to crack. The true horrors of Holmes' castle would only be fully uncovered years later. But even at the time, unsettling details began to surface. The building was designed with secrecy in mind. Some rooms had hidden peepholes, allowing Holmes to watch his victims. Others were completely soundproof, trapping screams within the walls. The basement was perhaps the most disturbing of all. Here, Holmes installed a crematorium, vats of acid, and surgical tables. Victims who vanished upstairs would reappear here, reduced to ashes, bones, or unrecognizable remains. Holmes didn't just kill, he experimented. Some accounts suggest he sold skeletons to medical schools, profiting from death as easily as he profited from life insurance schemes. To Holmes, people were not people. They were resources, means to an end. And the end was always power and profit. Among the many who fell into Holmes' trap, some names remain known. One was Julia Smythe, a married woman who became Holmes' mistress. When she threatened to leave him, she vanished, along with her daughter. Witnesses later recalled Holmes' calm explanation. Julia had left town suddenly, but no one ever saw her again. Another was Emmeline Sigrand, who took a job at Holmes' hotel. She was young, beautiful, and ambitious. She too disappeared, with Holmes offering vague excuses about her sudden departure. Then there were the Petezl children, whose story would later shock the nation. Holmes didn't limit himself to strangers. He ensnared entire families. Each disappearance was shrouded in lies and manipulation. Holmes was always one step ahead, crafting explanations that seemed reasonable until the truth finally emerged. Holmes wasn't just a killer. He was a master of deception. He juggled multiple wives, each unaware of the others. He forged documents, created false identities, and constantly shifted his story to fit the moment. When creditors pursued him, he claimed bankruptcy. When lovers asked questions, he charmed them into silence. When suspicion arose, he vanished into a new scheme. His lies were as intricate as the castle itself, layer upon layer, each designed to confuse and mislead. But every web eventually tangles. Holmes' greed, arrogance, and endless hunger for control would ultimately lead to his downfall. Holmes' undoing began not with the police of Chicago, but with his own criminal partners. One of them was Benjamin Petezl, a man Holmes drew into his schemes. Together, they plotted insurance fraud. Petezl would fake his death, and Holmes would collect the payout. But Holmes had no intention of splitting the money. Instead, he murdered Petezl for real. To cover his tracks, Holmes then manipulated Petezl's wife and children, leading them across states under false pretenses. The family trusted him. They had no idea he had already killed their husband and father. The disappearances that followed would finally draw investigators' attention. Holmes' empire of lies was starting to collapse. Holmes' cruelty reached its peak with the Petezl children. After murdering Benjamin, he convinced Mrs. Petezl that her husband was in hiding. She believed him, even allowing Holmes to travel with 3 of her children under the guise of reuniting them with their father. But Holmes had other plans. One by one, the children vanished. Later, investigators would uncover the horrifying truth. Holmes had killed them, hiding their remains in rented homes across the country. The murder of innocent children shocked even the most hardened detectives. It was one thing to swindle or even kill adults, but to betray and slaughter children who trusted him was unforgivable. The press would later call Holmes a monster, and the nation would agree. By 1894, Holmes was on the run. His crimes spanned multiple states, and suspicion followed him like a shadow. Finally, in Boston, authorities captured him on charges of insurance fraud. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized they had something far darker on their hands. When police searched Holmes' Chicago building, they uncovered the truth. The murder castle wasn't a hotel, it was a slaughterhouse. Reports of trapdoors, hidden rooms, acid vats, and bones shocked the world. Newspapers sensationalized the story, calling Holmes the Beast of Chicago. The man who once seemed charming and brilliant was revealed for what he truly was, a predator who had built a kingdom of death. But this was only the beginning of his reckoning. Holmes' arrest on fraud charges was just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators unraveled his past, they uncovered connections to disappearances, deaths, and the grotesque secrets of the Murder Castle. In 1895, Holmes was put on trial, not for the dozens of suspected murders, but specifically for the death of Benjamin Petezel. Prosecutors had enough evidence to secure a conviction. Witnesses testified about Holmes' manipulations, his lies, and his strange behavior. The newspapers had a field day. Holmes became a national sensation. Headlines painted him as a mad genius, a master of disguise, and a heartless killer. Some compared him to Dracula, others simply called him the devil in the White City. Despite his charm, the jury saw through his facade. Holmes was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. But what shocked the world more than the verdict was what Holmes did next. Awaiting execution, Holmes began to write. He published a confession, though even in death, he couldn't stop lying. In one breath, he admitted to killing 27 people. In another, he denied many of the crimes entirely. Some names he gave were real victims, others turned out to be alive. Detectives quickly realized that Holmes used his confession as another tool of manipulation, part truth, part fiction, designed to control the narrative. But certain details rang chillingly true. He described luring women into the castle, trapping them in sealed rooms, and using gas lines to suffocate them. He described disposing of bodies in acid, selling skeletons, and reducing human life to mere profit. Holmes even admitted, in cold words, that he felt no remorse. He claimed he was born with the devil inside. Whether he killed 9, 27, or more than 200, as some papers speculated, no one could say for certain. But one fact was undeniable. Holmes was a man without conscience. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was led to the gallows at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia. Crowds gathered outside, eager to see the devil finally brought to justice. Holmes remained calm, almost smug. In his final statement, he insisted he had never killed as many as people claimed. He seemed less concerned with forgiveness and more interested in leaving behind mystery. The noose was placed around his neck. At 10:13 a.m., the trapdoor opened. But Holmes' execution was as strange as his life. Instead of a quick death, his body jerked and twitched for nearly 20 minutes before finally falling still. Witnesses called it fitting that even in death, the devil refused to go quietly. But Holmes had left behind something more sinister than his crimes. He had left behind questions. How many had he really killed? And had the Murder Castle revealed all its secrets? After Holmes' arrest, the Murder Castle was left standing like a scar on Chicago's landscape. Journalists, curiosity seekers, and even tourists flocked to the site, desperate to see the House of Horrors. The building became infamous. Some wanted it preserved as evidence. In 1895, before Holmes' execution, the building mysteriously caught fire. Witnesses reported seeing men entering with cans of gasoline. By morning, much of the interior was destroyed. Theories spread. Was it arson to cover evidence? Or had Holmes' accomplices tried to erase the truth? Whatever the reason, the Murder Castle never reopened. Eventually, the ruins were torn down, replaced by a post office. But rumors persist that some of its hidden rooms may still lie beneath the ground. Holmes' story lingered long after his death. Newspapers turned him into legend, sensationalizing every detail. Some called him America's Jack the Ripper, others dubbed him the master of murder. For many Americans, Holmes shattered the illusion of safety. The idea that a man so charming, so intelligent, could be secretly running a slaughterhouse shook people to their core. Holmes represented something terrifying, that evil could hide behind a smile, behind respectability, behind the promise of opportunity. He wasn't the monster under the bed, he was the monster renting you a room. And perhaps most chilling of all, no one knows how many lives he really took. Modern psychologists often look back at Holmes as one of the earliest examples of a documented psychopath. He displayed all the classic traits: superficial charm, manipulativeness, lack of empathy, and a complete inability to feel guilt. People were pawns, and life itself was disposable. Some argue Holmes was a product of his time, a world of rapid industrialization, anonymity, and opportunity for crime. Others insist he was something timeless, a man born broken, whose darkness had no cure. Holmes himself once wrote, "I was born with the devil in me." It's a haunting phrase, one that continues to echo through the annals of true crime. As with any site of great evil, the Murder Castle attracted legends. Chicago locals whispered that the ruins were haunted. Visitors claimed to hear screams echoing from the basement. Workers at the post office built on the site reported strange noises, flickering lights, and an oppressive sense of dread. Whether ghostly or psychological, the shadow of Holmes seemed impossible to erase. Some even claimed Holmes himself had cursed the building, vowing his spirit would never leave. Fact or fiction, the legends kept the memory of the murder castle alive long after its walls had crumbled. Holmes' story didn't end with his death. Over the decades, his crimes inspired countless books, documentaries, and films. Perhaps most famously, the book The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson brought Holmes back into the spotlight, intertwining his story with the grandeur of the 1893 World's Fair. The tale captured the contrast between progress and horror, light and darkness. Hollywood has long sought to adapt Holmes' story. He is portrayed as both genius and monster, an American nightmare given flesh. But in truth, no movie or book can fully capture the terror of realizing what he did, building a hotel not for comfort, but for killing. Not everyone believes the legends. Some historians argue the murder castle has been exaggerated, its horrors amplified by the press eager to sell papers. They point out that while Holmes was unquestionably a murderer, the exact number of victims remains uncertain. Was it dozens, hundreds, or far fewer than the myths suggest? Still, even if Holmes killed only a fraction of what was claimed, the sheer audacity of building a death trap in plain sight remains one of the darkest chapters in American history. And sometimes, the mystery itself is more frightening than the truth. More than a century later, the story of H.H. Holmes still grips the imagination. He wasn't just a killer, he was an architect of death, a man who turned progress into predation, who built his empire on lies, pain, and blood. The murder castle may be gone, but its legend remains. Holmes reminds us of the darkness that can hide behind a charming smile, of the danger that lurks when trust is misplaced. His life leaves us with haunting questions. How many people walked into his castle and never walked out? How many secrets lie buried beneath Chicago's streets? And could someone like Holmes exist today, hiding behind the face of success? For all our progress, one truth remains. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a man in a fine suit, offering you a room for the night. And that is the chilling legacy of H.H. For Steve, the realization was personal. It wasn't just about Elizabeth Short anymore. It was about his father, his family, his own childhood. The man who raised him may have been one of the most dangerous predators of the 20th century. The weight of that truth was unbearable. But Steve refused to stay silent. He dedicated his life to proving his father's guilt, even if it meant carrying a burden no son should ever have to bear. More than 70 years have passed since Elizabeth Short was murdered, but the case refuses to fade. Every few years, new theories emerge, new suspects are named, new books are published. Each promises to solve the mystery. None ever do. Perhaps that's the tragedy of the Black Dahlia. The case is too old, the evidence too thin, the corruption too deep. The truth may forever remain hidden. But even without a verdict, the case has achieved a kind of immortality. It continues to fascinate, horrify, and inspire debate. And for Elizabeth, whose life was cut short, perhaps the only justice left is that we remember her not just as the Black Dahlia, but as a young woman who deserved so much more than the cruel fate she met. The Black Dahlia's story ends where it began, in Los Angeles, the city of dreams and nightmares. Elizabeth Short came to Hollywood searching for opportunity, for beauty, for love. What she found instead was exploitation, betrayal, and death. Her murder revealed the city's darkest truths, its corruption, its predators, its hunger for spectacle. And though her killer was never officially named, the shadows of men like George Hodel still hang over the case, a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. For true crime lovers, the Black Dahlia remains the ultimate mystery. For historians, it is a case study in failure and obsession. But for Elizabeth's memory, it is something else, a call not to forget the human being at the heart of the legend. She was not just a victim, not just a headline, not just a gruesome photograph. She was Elizabeth Short, a daughter, a dreamer, a woman who wanted to live. And until her story finds peace, Hollywood's most